Hey everybody, and welcome back to part two of our complete Power BI build walkthrough. In the first video, of course, we spent some time in the Power Query editor just walking through, a few very basic techniques for taking a big data table full of movie information and sort of spinning off some of the other dimensions in that data into other tables that we could relate back to our main table through a process of indexing and unpivoting the other data elements. So we've got our data model where, we might jump back into the Power Query editor a little bit for some very minor data cleanup as we go. But by and large, we're now done with the back end stuff and we're ready to sort of dedicate the rest of our attention to developing a really cool front end experience for any of our potential users. It's time to start thinking about which pages or tabs are going to make sense in our Power BI report in order to most effectively communicate the information that is in that movie's data set. We're going to start to think about what kind of visuals might be intriguing for someone to look at. We're going to start, thinking about the general layout at a very high level of our report, but we're not going to be focusing necessarily on the design itself as far as making everything look pretty. For now, we're just trying to come up with some very general data visuals to sort of get on the page, and then we're going to worry about the design elements in video number 3. So let's go ahead and kick things off with video number 2 by jumping back into our Power BI report now that we've got a data model to work with, and let's start looking at some things that might be fun to visualize. Now, before we get started with the actual data visualization, one thing I want to point out that I forgot to do in the Power Query editor was to grab my date table. So I have added a date table to my data model that you can see starts in 1914 and extends all the way to 2023. So it's going to cover my entire, movie data set just fine. And I've got that in my relationship modeler. I've got that joined up on my in theaters date. So I've got a date table now. It's going to make it a little bit easier to visualize some of that time series instead of trying to visualize every single day for more than a century. So let's go ahead and start talking about how we're going to visualize the actual data in this report now that we've spent some time in the query editor sort of cleaning it up. The first thing that we want to start thinking about is what is the structure of this report going to look like? And I'm going to keep things super, super simple in this report. Honestly, the story that I'm going to sort of lay out here for this data set is kind of a framework for a lot of Power BI reports. And that is the first page of this report. I'm going to have some kind of a landing page where I'm going to include, kind of an overview of what the data is. I'm going to include, maybe some summary measures and some page navigation features. And so you can call this landing, you can call it summary, whatever. The next page that I'm going to build is going to be kind of a drill down or deeper look at directors. Then I'm going to have a page sort of focused on actors, and then I'm going to have a page focused on writers. And as we build, we may come up with some visuals that don't really fit perfectly in any of these. We may end up picking up an additional page here, but by and large, I'm going to have kind of a landing or summary page. If you want to call this, landing summary, that's totally up to you. And then I'm going to have, special kind of snapshots focused on some of these other tables, directors, actors, and writers. If you wanted to create even a page for genres, that is totally understandable. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pick that up. Okay, so we've got 5 pages here, and we're not really focused yet on, actually organizing the report. What we really want to do is we want to start kind of laying out some different visuals and ideas, for what can help us tell the most effective story possible with the data that we have available. And a lot of the most interesting data is obviously going to be in our RT Movies main data set, where we can see like the average audience rating for movies, the tomato meter rating, which is going to be basically a compilation of what actual professional critics rated these movies. We've got information about the different studios. the different like maturity ratings for these movies, average runtime. We've got some stuff that we can kind of turn into KPIs that a user might find interesting before really diving deep into some of this data. So, the first thing that we're going to need that I haven't set up yet is a table to actually house all of our measures, because we're going to want to create some measures based off of our RT movies main data set. So I'm going to go ahead and go up here to my ribbon, and I'm going to click on this Enter Data button. And this is going to allow me to manually enter information into a table. Fortunately, to create a measures table, I really don't need to do anything here. I just need to give this table a name. And I'm going to call this underscore measures. And the reason that I'm calling it underscore measures is this underscore is going to ensure that alphabetically, this table is going to fall at the top of my list over here on the right. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. Power BI is going to think for a split second, and then I'm going to end up with my underscore measures table here at the top. And I'm going to go ahead and right click and add a new measure. This measure is just a placeholder measure so that we can turn this from a regular table into a measures table. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step, but literally I'm just going to call this measure placeholder, and I'm just going to put, blank or nothing into this measure. Now I'm going to hide column 1 by right clicking on it and selecting hide, and watch what happens to this table as I click hide. It is immediately going to hide that column and transform this into a measures table. So now I've got, a table here where I can kind of keep all of my measures all in one place. It's just going to help me be more effective and more organized as I'm sort of building this. I don't want to build my measures and have them in all of these other tables where I've got to remember, where did I put that measure? Everything is going to be here. We're not going to be creating a whole lot of measures for this report, just to keep things as simple as possible. Since this is a tutorial, I'd say that we're probably going to be creating between 10 and 20 measures, and most of them are going to be pretty straightforward. So for this landing summary page, we want to keep our measures really, really high level, really simple stuff. And so the first measure that I'm going to want to create based on this movie data set is a movie count. If somebody was jumping into this report blind, they probably want to know how many movies are in the data set. This is going to be a super simple measure because all we're basically doing is just counting our index field from our RT movies main data set, where we know that each row represents a unique movie. There's our movie count. And if you want to go ahead and start creating some cards and just sort of throwing some of these high-level measures onto this first page, you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and format this card. I'm going to edit the callout value to show all digits. And I'm also going to make sure that this is formatted correctly. If we have a number that requires commas, we want to make sure that it's formatted. We don't want the user to have to think for even a moment, whether or not this is 16,000, 166,000. We want it to just be obvious by formatting it correctly. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and add a few more cards in here for the main measures that I know I'm going to need on this summary page. The next one that I'm going to create is I want a critic count, and this is going to be summing my tomato meter count, which just represents all of the unique critics that have been, that are involved in sort of aggregating the overall tomato meter score. I'm going to go ahead and add that to this card. I'm going to make sure that it is formatted correctly. So you can see there are about 942,000 total critics involved in sort of aggregating the overall score for these movies. Next, I might as well go ahead and grab my average RT score. So let's go ahead and call that average. And that's going to be my tomato meter rating. And I'm on the wrong card, but I'm going to go ahead and grab that and drop it there. Honestly, 2 decimal places is probably more than I need for most of my instances. So I'm going to set this to only show 1 trailing decimal. The next measure I'm going to need is an audience count. And I would expect this to be a fairly large number because this is going to be, the total size of the audience that has evaluated these movies within the data set. So, this could be several billion people, and it looks like it is. Let's go ahead and add commas. Yeah, you can see that my audience count is just shy of 2.5 billion people, so a lot of users. And if we're interested to see what the average audience score was, all we have to do is create yet another measure called average audience score. And this is going to be average audience rating. I'm going to go ahead and drop that here. You can see that it's almost identical to the average RT score. And I'm going to make sure that this also only has one trailing decimal place. So these are my 5 pretty much most important, very basic measures for this data set that I'm going to be looking to compare across pretty much everything else in the data. So these are the 5 numbers that I'm going to be presenting on my landing and summary page. Next, since this is a summary page, it probably makes sense to go back through my RT movies main data set and see, kind of like what else, might make sense here. If we want to create a measure for average runtime, we can do that. So let's go ahead and create another card for the average runtime among all of the movies here. Looks like about, an hour and a half to 2 hours. Seems to make sense. We want to add, something just kind of reminding people that this is in minutes. That might make sense as well. The next visual that we could create on a landing and summary page, might be to actually take, some of the movie data or the names of these movies and just present kind of a rolled up view of, maybe the top 50 movies. And so let's go ahead and create a bar chart here. We'll include movie title on our y-axis. That's absolutely fine. Let's go ahead and grab our, let's see, which one do I want? Let's go ahead and grab average RT score and add that to our axis here. You can see, it looks like something might be broken here, but actually there's just so many movies. It looks like I've got a lot of movies here that are 100% or perfect scores. As I keep scrolling, you can see some of these starting to fall off. I'm now at like 97. We don't necessarily want to have a summary visual for all 16,000 movies. That's a lot for somebody to try to absorb on a landing and summary page. So what we can do here is we can specify that we just want, for this visual, the top 50 movies. And then a way of filtering this, it might make sense to just use the audience count, as kind of a threshold for looking at the most popular or significant movies in the data set. And immediately, you'll see, okay, suddenly this bar chart is a little bit more intriguing to look at. You can see that there's, a lot more variety to the average RT scores here now that we're just looking at the top 50 movies based on the number of audience members who evaluated them. Most of these are going to be much more sort of mainstream films here, like, E.T., Rocky, Lord of the Rings. Okay, so suddenly this is a more intriguing visual for a possible landing page. We can go ahead and change the title of this to sort of remind us what's here, but we can call this Top 50 Movies Based on Audience Count. We'll just kind of leave that for now. One other thing that I might want to add to my title is the average RT score of top 50 movies based on audience count. We're already starting to kind of run out of real estate on this first page. If we kept all 6 of these KPI cards and a bar chart, and if we added maybe a little bit of additional information here, let's say, we added a look at all of the movies based on their rating. You can see that there's some stuff that needs to be cleaned up here. I've got PG-13 and PG-13 with a trailing parentheses, and the same for R. We could still go ahead and create this bar chart, or just to mix it up, maybe use something like this. If we wanted to, break down the different studios, that's a lot of information. Probably doesn't make sense for a landing page. If we wanted to use our in theaters date to come up with a chart that tracks the releases of all of these movies over time, we can add year to our x-axis, add movie count to our y-axis, just to sort of highlight that, it looks like around the 1980s, more and more movies, started coming out on a yearly basis. So it looks like the film industry just really exploded, in the latter quarter or so of the 20th century. I feel like that's not terribly surprising to anyone who's watching this video. As we start to visualize and just kind of come up with some, initial views for our pages, this is also a great time to just kind of jump back into the Power Query Editor to fix anything that looks noticeably broken. I'm going to go ahead and hop over to the Power Query Editor really quickly to fix this PG-13 and R, anomaly in the data. Let's go ahead and open up the Power Query Editor. Going to head over here, and I'm just going to add some additional logic here to my main table. I'm going to find PG-13 with the trailing parentheses and just change that to PG-13. Going to do the same thing here for R. When there's a parenthesis, just change that to R. I'm going to go ahead and reload this and see if that took care of these anomalies. Yep, immediately they're gone. That's all looking pretty good. All I'm doing is setting up the bare bones of the data visuals on each page. Obviously, in one of the accompany videos for this tutorial, I'm going to be going through and cleaning up everything and making it look more attractive. But for now, I've got most of the visuals here that I think are going to make sense on this landing page. And of course, I'm also going to be adding some slicers and stuff to give the, give a user or somebody who's using this tool the ability to sort of filter and look for and find what they're looking for. Okay, so now let's go to our genres page and try to lay out some visuals that might make sense here. Obviously, one of the most important views that's going to make sense for a page called genre is to sort of grab our genre dimension from our movie genre table. Go ahead and pull that over. And we're probably going to want to look at and see which of our measures are going to make the most sense over here. So let's go ahead and drag movie count. Looks like there are 17 movies that didn't have any kind of a genre. Might be worth just excluding those for consistency's sake, since it's such a small number of films, or you can just leave it in there to highlight the fact that, hey, looks like out of all of our movies, a very small percentage don't have a genre. That could be a data error or something that you want to call attention to. So it's up to you whether or not you kind of want to leave this little oddity here in the data. For these purposes, we're just going to leave it. If you want to express this as a bar chart, it's probably, the most effective way of sort of capturing this information. Obviously we're trying to think of, what is a user going to want to do with this horizontal bar chart? If somebody's coming and looking at this, maybe they want to know, what are the top films based on drama, or for the drama genre or the comedy genre. So we're going to want to make sure that they have, companion visuals to sort of help find what they're looking for. So maybe they're interested in understanding what are the average RT scores or audience scores for the different genres. That's something that we can help a user with. Let's try just adding a couple of donut charts to this page. And what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to create a couple of donut charts that help a user understand, out of a possible score of 100, what are audiences rating these different genres? So we've already got our average RT score and our average audience score. What we're going to need in order to get this donut chart to work correctly, let's go ahead and just drop average RT score into this to sort of show what I'm talking about. Currently, we can see that 60.5 makes up 100% of the donut chart. So, that's not a particularly useful way of telling this story, but there's an easy way that we can use DAX to sort of make this donut chart tell a more captivating story. Let's go ahead and come up with a measure called RT score remaining. And this is going to just be the delta between 100, which is the maximum possible RT score that any movie is capable of attaining. And we're going to subtract from 100 our average RT score. Now I'm going to go ahead and just drop that in to my donut chart. And even though I'm going to come back and do a lot of formatting later, I'm just going to go ahead and let this be gray so that someone who's looking at this donut chart can easily tell, about 60% was the RT score for all of the movies together. And that way, when a user comes through here and they're clicking on drama or comedy or action adventure, this chart updates so that a user can kind of go through here and see, roughly what critics thought of the movies that belong to a certain genre. And we're going to do exactly the same thing over here with our average audience score. I'm going to go ahead and drop average audience score, which is almost identical to the critical score. And I'm going to create another measure over here that is going to be audience score remaining, or the delta between 100 and what audiences on average actually scored these films. And I'm going to drag that in there, and I'm going to do just a little bit of formatting here. You can sort of reorder your measures so that, if our average score is primarily populating the left side of the donut chart, we want that to be the same over here in our second one. But now that we have these two donut charts side by side, it makes it easier for a user to come through and click on any of these items and see if there was any real difference in how critics and audiences scored the movies that belong to a specific genre. Like, notice art house and international. It looks like on average, the critics that make up the overall RT score rated these movies about a 71. Whereas audiences rated these films about a 67. So not a whole lot of difference, but enough that, might be noteworthy here. Next, maybe we want to actually give users the ability to see the top films that make up any of these genres as they're sort of clicking through. So let's go ahead and just add a table here. And I'm choosing a table because there are actually multiple measures that I'm interested in showing for any of these genres that the user selects. So I'm going to go ahead and grab movie title. That's going to be my big one here. If you want to test that everything is working correctly, you can just sort of click through here. Let's see. Yeah, most of these are looking like horror films that I recognize. Let's go ahead and grab movie count's not going to make sense because it's always going to be 1 for any of these movie titles. So we don't need that. I think it would definitely be helpful to grab something like average runtime. We can grab the average audience score for sure, and we can also grab the average RT score. That's all looking pretty good. And now we have to decide, what might make the most sense to order this table so that users can find, the most significant movies out of, all 16,000 of these more easily. Maybe we can just use our audience count again. I'll kind of add that over here on the right, and you can sort by that if you want to. That way we've got, the more mainstream films, again, kind of floating to the top here, the movies that people are more likely to recognize and be searching for. And that way, as somebody comes through here and they select dramas, comedies, action adventure, mystery and suspense, it's a lot easier for people to sort of identify, all of these different movies. Again, plenty of stuff that we need to do to come back later and format these. For now, we're just trying to identify what is the likely story that we're really interested in telling, and what are, maybe 4 or 5 visuals that are going to help us really create a great user experience around that story. So for now, I'm pretty happy with the genres page. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that as is and move on to my directors page. Now, as we start getting into the directors and the actors and the writers, here there's a lot more sort of interaction, between these different data sets. Because a director could work with multiple actors, multiple times. Actors, there are plenty of actors that like to work together and appear in multiple films together. Think about like Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, who have appeared in a few movies together, and Leonardo DiCaprio has appeared in numerous films by Martin Scorsese. So, there may be many interactions that we want to try to figure out ways to sort of back into here. Let's just make a mental note of that. I'm going to be coming back to that later in the next video when we start coming up with other features to sort of tie together the interactivity of this entire report. But for now, let's just focus on what kinds of data visuals might be interesting to look at for directors. Now, the first visual that kind of stands out that might be, most interesting to include here is, let's just literally go and try to make a visual that just looks at the directors who have made the most films. It looks like we have quite a few blank values in the data set. That's fine. Stuff like that, is not uncommon when you're building Power BI tools, but we are just going to go up here to our filters. We're going to remove blank just to make this visual look a little bit cleaner. It would be weird to have blank be our top director. So we're just going to filter that out of the data, and we're going to go ahead and lock this filter and hide it so that it is kept in the background and any users wouldn't see that filter when we publish it. The next visual that might be interesting to look at for our directors might be to try to understand not just the directors that have the largest outputs, but also the directors that have the largest relative RT scores, for their output. Maybe we have some directors in here that make a lot of films. However, on average, they have, pretty lowly rated films. Obviously this is a little bit redundant to have counts by director and counts by director over here. So if we decide that we just want to scrap one visual as we're done experimenting, we can always get rid of a visual if we think that it's redundant. In fact, that's encouraged. So let's go ahead and start playing with this new bar chart that we've created. It looks like Woody Allen has made the most films out of all the directors in the data set, but it would be more interesting to sort of compare the scores of those films so that we can see of these directors who are very prolific, are any of them just regularly churning out garbage, or are any directors regularly churning out like masterpieces? So let's go ahead and change this from a clustered column chart to a clustered line in column chart. And I'm going to add to this average RT score, and I'm going to add average audience score, which is fine because they operate on exactly the same scale from 0 to 100. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to turn on my secondary y-axis since I've got a lot going on. And now I'm going to just start kind of doing some of the very rudimentary formatting over here. So for my lines, since my lines are maybe a little bit distracting, I'm going to try to make those a little bit more subtle here. I'm going to make these lines just a very light gray. And I'm also going to do the same thing with my columns here. I'm going to kind of suppress those by making them a light gray, kind of forcing those to the background. I'm going to add some additional spacing or padding. And then I'm going to turn on my markers here. And for my average RT score, I'm going to make my markers just a little bit larger. I'm going to make those kind of a light blue. And for my average audience score, I'm going to increase the size just a little bit. And I'm going to make those kind of this navy color here. Or if you wanted to sort of draw additional contrast between the two, you can even pick a completely different color. For my lines, let's go ahead and make those even more subtle by changing them from solid to dotted. Because really all we are interested in is identifying, are there any directors who, like Wes Craven, who's made 20 films, but it looks like, his films on average by audiences and by critics are only rated about a 48.6 out of 100. So, it would be nice to kind of be able to add something to this, This is still a lot of information to try to process. How do we, help a viewer of this visual sort of make sense very easily of whether or not these different scores are good or bad? It might be helpful to add an additional line here that is sort of the RT threshold for fresh. So let's just go ahead and call this fresh rating. Let's set that to 60. That way we can add a threshold here that helps us understand, which directors are consistently within that fresh threshold and which ones are consistently below it. So let's go ahead and make that line dark. Let's go ahead and turn off our markers for the fresh rating. That's looking pretty good. Again, we're going to come back in a future video and sort of, streamline and clean up and really focus on the aesthetics of all of these data visuals. But for now, this is sort of helping us understand who are the most prolific directors and how many of these directors are consistently putting out, better or weaker material. And we can kind of scroll over here and, especially look for any that have, really radically different, RT scores compared to audience scores like we see here. It looks like Gary Marshall in particular. The critics that make up the average RT score are only rating him about a 34, but audiences seem to like the films much, much more. So stuff like that is interesting. And we can go ahead and get rid of this visual now, since the chart that we've created here basically tells the same story. If we want to add a way for someone to sort of quickly reference the movies that make up a director's output, we could always just head back to our genres tab and grab that same chart so that someone could, for example, click on Woody Allen's name and see all of Woody Allen's films presented with the ability to sort by RT score or audience score. There we go. I'm going to unselect Woody Allen, if it will let me. There we go. And maybe you even want to preserve the same ability to sort of compare audience and RT scores. It's okay to, recycle some of the same visuals if they're useful for telling a specific story. We'll go ahead and leave that as it is for now. And for these other pages, we're going to be continuing to sort of recycle some of these themes, so that maybe we're interested in seeing something very, very similar for actors. We can just literally take our chart over here, copy it to our actors page, and instead of using directors, we'll grab our cast. We're going to go into our filter settings, and we're going to remove blanks again. It looks like in our parsing out of the actor column, it looks like we ended up with junior sort of captured on its own. That's obviously not going to be particularly useful. So let's go ahead and add a new filter that says actor cannot be blank and it cannot be Junior. I'm noticing that my blank is still appearing here. That's fine. It just means that it's not being evaluated as blank. It's being evaluated as, kind of being empty or maybe a space. So I'm going to just add actor back again. I'm going to add a second filter on actor to get rid of those empty values. And it looks like Samuel L. Jackson's the most prolific actor in the data set. Again, not terribly surprising for anyone who watches a fair number of films. I'm going to go ahead and expand that a little bit, make it larger. And I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to grab some of the visuals that I've been using on my other pages. And I'm even going to copy these over for writers. I'm going to get rid of actor, change this to writer. Now notice that for the writers, I have a lot of blanks and a lot of juniors. So let's go ahead and fix our filters over here. I'm noticing that I have a filter on director for my actors table. That's not necessary. I'm heading back over to writers. Let's go ahead and remove all of the blanks that are in here. Let's add writers again as a filter. And let's get rid of junior. There we go. And so now I've at least got 5 pages with some, very, very similar visuals, but of course we'll continue to refine this as we go. For me, usually once I've laid out all of my initial visuals that I'm going to use to sort of tell my story, then, I often create sort of a testing area that I keep hidden where I might go through and just sort of play with some of the, things that I've already built to see if I can come up with some more interesting visuals. And then I can always find a place for these later. But like one thing that I'm sort of thinking about is, I'm curious whether or not there is, any kind of a relationship across different dimensions here for the relationship between the average RT score and the average audience score. Maybe I want to look at that by genre. Trying to figure out where do audiences or where do audiences and film critics tend to agree or disagree the most. I'm noticing one over here. It looks like that's a blank genre. Let's go ahead and get rid of that since that data point doesn't really mean much. Cult movies might make sense that that's a bit of an outlier. It looks like the average RT score is 61. Average audience score is 56, so maybe audiences were a little bit later discovering some of those films. Got one over here where the average RT score is only 7 and the average audience score is 73.5. You can see though that overall, the audience score and the RT score are pretty linear. They track pretty closely together. So maybe this isn't the most interesting view, but I'm just going to go ahead and shrink this down, kind of save it for later. Maybe we're interested in seeing if there's a relationship between average audience score and runtime. So let's go ahead and put average audience score on our y-axis. Let's go ahead and drop average runtime into our x-axis. Obviously, there's not really a relationship here. Looks like people are pretty comfortable with longer Westerns. People maybe prefer shorter documentaries. Maybe you even want to start playing with actors a little bit, trying to get an idea of whether or not audiences and critics agree on actors. Let's go ahead and put, obviously there are a lot of actors, but we can throw actors into our scatter plot. There's tons of them, so maybe we only want to look at the top 25 actors based on movie count. Or likewise, maybe we're interested in understanding, again, which actors do directors like to work with most? You could use something like the decomposition tree, add movie count to analyze, add director and actor, so that we can then, well, first, let me go ahead and remove blanks from actor and director, since we keep running into that issue. Let's go ahead and expand movie count to director. And let's go ahead and see who Steven Spielberg frequently likes to cast in his films. And you can see it looks like a Ted Grossman is in 5 of Steven Spielberg's movies. Tom Hanks is in 5. Harrison Ford is in 4, which makes sense. Maybe we decide that we like this visual so much, we're actually going to add it to our director's page. Just going to go ahead and drag that into place. Okay. So obviously there are so many more visuals that we could add to this report. We might be adding a few more as we continue to build this thing out, but for now, we've at least got a good start on some visuals on every single page. Now it's time to hop over into PowerPoint and start making an actual design to sort of tie all of this together. And then after that, we're going to do one more video where we sort of walk through the finishing touches that are going to turn this into a full-blown report. So for now, everything's pretty ugly. We've got all of our data visuals, but obviously we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to formatting. All of that's going to come in the next video. I'll be showing you how to just clean this up, make everything look amazing. And then of course, we're going to start adding some functionality like getting our slicers in here, maybe adding some bookmarks, page navigation buttons, things that are going to turn this into a much more immersive and interactive experience. So I'll see you over in the next video.